North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile over the East Sea this morning, presumed to be a new type of solid-fuel missile. The regime released its leader's message right after, and South Korea's military issued a stern warning. The defense ministers of South Korea and the U.S. meet in Washington, strongly condemning North Korea's deployment in Russia. The two allies agreed to incorporate responses to a North Korea nuclear attack in their joint military exercises. The race to the White House remains too close to call, with less than a week until Election Day. Tonight, we take a closer look at what the election outcome could mean for the South Korean economy. It's October 31st, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with news of an intercontinental ballistic missile test by North Korea early this morning, presumed to be using a new type of fuel. South Korea's military issued a strong condemnation and urged it to stop harming peace. Park Go-nu has this report.
On Thursday, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said that North Korea test-launched an intercontinental ballistic missile at a high angle toward the East Sea from the Pyongyang area at around 7:10 a.m. It landed after flying approximately 1,000 kilometers. This is the first time in 43 days that the regime had tested a ballistic missile, and it has been 10 months since it launched an ICBM. On the same day, the JCS strongly condemned the North for its provocations.
North Korea's long-range ballistic missile launch is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Our military strongly condemns the Kim Jong-un's regime's illegal and reckless provocations and urges it to stop immediately, as this harms peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and the international community.
The JCS added that North Korea has been engaging in illegal provocations despite repeated warnings from the South, and warned that the North will be responsible for any kind of circumstances that may follow. The North typically launches long-range missiles at a sharp angle to prevent them from flying over neighboring countries. Although further analysis is needed, military officials say that Thursday's missile may have been a new type of solid-fuel ICBM, using a recently unveiled 12-axle transporter erector launcher. Officials have also emphasized the importance of examining the timing of the missile launch.
It seems the North is trying to gain bargaining power ahead of the US presidential election, while breaking away from being criticized for sending troops to Russia.
The JCS also said related information is being shared with the US and Japanese authorities while increasing readiness. The North usually sends out messages a day after it tests missiles, but on Thursday, in a surprise move, Kim Jong-un delivered a message just 5 hours after the launch. The regime's state media publicly reported that Kim described the launch as an appropriate military action to respond to enemies that threatened them. He also said that Pyongyang will continue to strengthen its nuclear capabilities. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has called for close coordination with the international community in response to North Korea's latest ICBM launch. Following a briefing by the National Security Council hours after the launch on this Thursday morning, President Yoon also called for extensive preparation against any unexpected provocation by North Korea. South Korea's National Security Council, for its part, has denounced North Korea's violation of UN Security Council resolutions and has decided to designate fresh sanctions on the regime while working with partners to ensure effective implementation of existing sanctions. Up next, our Choi Min-jung explains how big of a threat the latest launch is, what could be behind Kim Jong-un's prompt comment, and the timing of all this.
North Korea launched its longest-flying intercontinental ballistic missile on Thursday. South Korea's initial analysis has shown that the missile is presumed to be a new solid-fuel ICBM, which, according to Japan, traveled a record 86 minutes, the longest flight time ever recorded by the regime. The missile also reached a record height of around 7,000 kilometers. A professor at Dongguk University noted that this advancement is a threat.
The missile could fly a longer distance than existing ICBMs if it were to be launched at a normal angle. In that sense, it can be seen as an even bigger threat.
Professor Kim explained that such a launch could put the entire U.S. within striking range. The provocation was anticipated by many as the U.S. is approaching its presidential election next week. However, another expert said there is more behind Pyongyang's motives.
The focus on this provocation was more on showing that North Korea is maintaining its defense posture even after the dispatch of troops to Russia, rather than the U.S. presidential election. It's showing that it has sufficient nuclear power to maintain deterrence despite the dispatch of troops.
Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un's prompt comment on the weapons test is also seen as a rare move.
It's very unusual for the North Korean state media to report the ICBM launch so quickly. I think the reason probably lies in their confidence in its success.
Likewise, the North appears to have embedded several strategic aims behind its latest missile launch amid heightened security tensions in the Middle East and on the Korean Peninsula. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
In response to the North ICBM launch, South Korea and the U.S. Air Forces on Thursday conducted large-scale aerial maneuvers as part of the Freedom Flag 2024 exercise. South Korea's F-35A, F-15K, and KF-16 fighter jets equipped with precision-guided weapons flew in formation with U.S. F-35B and F-16 fighters, as well as the MQ-9 unmanned aerial vehicle. The previous day, the forces successfully struck targets simulating the enemy's transporter Orekta launcher. The Freedom Flag exercise is a combined large-force flying exercise between the allies aimed at boosting defense capabilities and readiness against North Korean threats. Over in Washington, the Allies' defense chiefs strongly condemned North Korea for deploying troops to Russia. For the first time, South Korea and the U.S. have agreed to incorporate realistic responses to a North Korean nuclear attack in their joint military exercises. Our Kim Jong-sil reports.
The defense ministers of South Korea and the U.S. strongly condemned in the strongest terms with one voice North Korea's troop deployment to Russia. They made the remarks at the 56th Security Consultative Meeting held in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday local time. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin revealed that North Korea has sent about 10,000 soldiers to eastern Russia, with some reportedly moving closer to Ukraine.
I am increasingly concerned that the Kremlin plans to use these North Korean soldiers to support Russia's combat operations in Russia's Kursk region near the border with Ukraine.
The U.S. Secretary of Defense stated that while he would not speculate on the timing of the deployment, if North Korean troops engage in combat, they will be seen as belligerents and could face casualties. South Korean Defense Minister Kim Yong-yeon emphasized that North Korea's deployment could heighten security risks on the Korean peninsula.
In exchange for sending troops to Russia, North Korea is likely to demand advanced military technologies, such as enhancing tactical nuclear weapons, ICBM missile development, reconnaissance satellite technologies, and nuclear-powered submarine technologies.
Minister Kim also warned of potential interference by North Korea in the upcoming U.S. presidential election, with Pyongyang likely wanting to exaggerate its presence. For the first time, South Korea and the U.S. have officially agreed to include a scenario involving a North Korean nuclear attack on the South in their operational plans. In the joint statement, they decided that future combined exercises should include appropriate and realistic scenarios, including responses to DPRK nuclear use. The two sides vowed to deter North Korea's nuclear threat with the alliance's overwhelming strength while using sanctions and pressure to, quote, dissuade and delay North Korea's nuclear development. Experts highlight that the shift in language is notable, as previous statements had frequently emphasized denuclearization, a term that was standard until their last meeting.
In the United States, it is also a growing voice that denuclearization itself is not the realistic at all. In that kind of a situation, it is very important the SCM, most highest the mechanism of the South Korea-US alliance should include the denuclearization of North Korea, because this is the ultimate goal for the South Korean defense.
Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
In In the U.S., the race remains too close to call as we count down 5 days to the November 5th presidential election. And instead of pledges, the unfortunate use of profanity is emerging as a hot topic. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
With the 2024 U.S. presidential elections expected to be one of the closest in recent years, a lot of focus is on key battleground states. Among the key battleground states are the three Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. According to a CNN poll released on Wednesday, Vice President Kamala Harris has a slight lead in Wisconsin and Michigan and is tied with former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. Harris leads Trump 48% to 43% in Michigan, while she leads the Republican candidate by 6 percentage points in Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, both candidates had 48%. The three states were all won by Trump in 2016 when he defeated Hillary Clinton, but U.S. President Joe Biden took them back in the 2020 election. As the election is now less than a week away, the race has also been marred by controversial comments by those supporting the two candidates. Trump on Wednesday slammed Biden after the president appeared to call the Republican candidate's supporters garbage, while referencing a controversial comment by a guest speaker at a Trump rally. While the White House insisted the president was not calling Trump supporters garbage, Vice President Harris seemingly distances herself from Biden's comments.
Listen, I think that, first of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
And with such a tight White House race, it leaves very little room for mistakes as the two candidates continue to campaign in key battleground states leading up to next Tuesday's election. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea is bracing for the implications of the election outcome in terms of not just politics and diplomacy, but also the domestic economy and industries. Our economics correspondent Moon Hae-ryun joins us in the studio to tell us more. Hae-ryun, trade and tariffs are key elements here. Walk us through how this might be affected by the election.
Yes, so the two candidates, incumbent Vice President, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump, propose very different tariff policies. Harris supports a targeted tariff strategy affecting specific goods and countries, while Trump plans broad tariffs of 10 to 20% on nearly all imports, with higher tariffs on Chinese goods. His tariffs would replace the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act as a means to incentivize companies to establish U.S.-based operations. This shift has caught the attention of South Korean companies as these laws directly influence their investments in U.S. facilities. The IRA has been giving tax credits to South Korean electric vehicle battery companies such as LG Energy Solution and SK On. The Chips and Science Act gives companies subsidies to build plants in the U.S. Samsung Electronics is due to receive up to $6.4 billion of subsidies to build its foundry in Texas, while SK Hynix is due to receive $450 million in subsidies to build its packaging facility in Indiana. If a future Trump administration cuts subsidies, it would reduce the appeal of South Korean investments in the U.S. and strain their finances. Experts say that this is, however, an unlikely scenario.
In order to remove the subsidies, President Trump will have to remove the laws, and that will require approval from Congress. So not only will Trump have to become the president, but the House of Representatives and the Senate both have to be in Republican hands.
That being said, it's important to think about the intentions behind such statements.
It's unlikely that the CHIPS Act will be brought to a halt, but this is more of a signal to say that he wants more commitment from overseas companies to invest in the U.S.
You talked about a higher tariff on Chinese imports. What impact could the potential trade war between the U.S. and China, have on Korean industries?
Yeah, so Trump has currently proposed a 60% tariff on all Chinese imports to the U.S. and even higher tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles to stop them from entering through Mexico. South Korea closely monitors U.S.-China trade moves as its economy, especially in semiconductors, heavily depends on both markets. Major players like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix rely on exports to both countries as critical parts of global tech supply chains. Here's what an expert said.
The majority of our semiconductors are used in smartphones and computers, with China responsible for 60 to 70% of exports, so this is likely to take a hit.
However, trade tensions with Beijing would likely persist even if Harris were elected. The Biden-Harris administration has targeted tariffs on Chinese EVs, solar cells, and steel and aluminium, as well as finalizing restrictions on U.S. investments in advanced tech in China. While South Korea's finance ministry expects limited impact on domestic industries, markets remain cautious.
And what are some other implications of these tariffs outside the industrial setting?
So the reason why Trump's tariff policies are appealing to some voters in the U.S. is because they think that if these tariffs are imposed on foreign products, this will increase the price of these imports to make domestic goods more competitive. However, economists say that this additional cost could be passed down to businesses and consumers.
Trump's proposed policies, even though perhaps they're not as specific as Harris's announced policies, will have higher inflationary measures.
An estimate from an American think tank tallied the annual cost of the proposed tariffs at $2,600 for a typical American household. This comes as manufacturers using imported materials may face higher costs, which they could then transfer to buyers by raising prices on products. And products with limited domestic alternatives could become even more expensive for consumers. This could have a global impact if interest rates are increased to tackle inflation, as central banks around the world, including the Bank of Korea, look to the Federal Reserve's monetary policies.
Right. Thank you, Arirang, for the update.
Thank you for having me.
Korea's industrial output shrank on month in September, as did the country's retail sales, while facility investment rebounded. Lee Soo-jin covers the latest findings.
South Korea's industrial output fell once again in September on weaker chip production, while consumption also remained sluggish. Data from Statistics Korea on Thursday showed that industrial production dropped 0.3% in September compared to the month before. The decrease seen last month comes after the country recorded a rise of 1.3% for the first time in 4 months in August. A breakdown of the data showed that semiconductor production dropped 2.6% on month, with falls in the production of system semiconductors and silicon wafers, leading to a decline in overall mining and manufacturing production. While manufacturing production alone dropped 0.1% after seeing an increase in August, taking into account the number of working days, the sector saw a rise in September as well. Production in the service sector fell 0.7% last month after seeing a rise for 3 straight months. Retail sales, which indicate trends in goods consumption, also fell 0.4% on month after seeing a rise in August. And this was mostly attributed to lower sales of non-durable goods such as food and beverages, as well as semi-durable goods like shoes and bags. As for investment, the data showed that facility investment, on the other hand, rose compared to the previous month on greater investment in machinery, despite the decrease seen in transportation equipment investment. But construction investment remained weak as construction activity showed a downward trend for the 5th straight month in September.
What is notable about investment is that facility investment is showing a significant increase, and although construction activities declined, orders have been rising for 2 consecutive quarters, indicating that a recovery can be expected in the future.
The official says that while there was a drop in production last month, it was still showing a solid and stable trend, but added that consumption has yet to show signs of recovery. 이수진, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has reported a 40% plunge on quarter in chip profits, raking in 3.9 trillion won in the third quarter. The profit is lower than market projections, and the chipmaker has linked the weaker than expected performance to a number of factors, including lackluster demand for personal computers and smartphones and the weak dollar. To bolster profitability, Samsung has pledged to focus on the production of high-end chips. In total, the company posted an operating profit of 9.2 trillion won in the third quarter and sales of 79.1 trillion won. South Korea's national tax revenue recorded a sharp decline for the first 9 months of the year. Data from the Finance Ministry released on Thursday showed that revenue from January to September fell more than 11 trillion won, or around $8 billion compared to the same period last year. This was mostly attributed to the fall in corporate tax collected due to operating losses suffered by large conglomerates. When compared to the budget for this year, the revenue collected accounted for around 69%, lower than the 77.5% recorded during the same period last year. In other news, K-pop artist G-Dragon has released a new song after around a 7-year break. His agency, Galaxy Corporation, announced on Thursday that the musician dropped the single Power at 6 p.m. Korean time. This is his first solo release in 7 years and 4 months since his mini-album 권지용 in 2017. The song Power talks about the influence of media and the blending of different types of power within a catchy beats and intense rap. After a chilly morning, the temperature rose to 20 degrees Celsius in Seoul today, far exceeding the average level by more than 5 degrees. The whole country will surpass 20 degrees in the middle of the day tomorrow. However, after the sun goes down, temperatures will drop quickly. Even though Typhoon Kongray will not have a direct impact on the Korean peninsula, the rain clouds left by the typhoon move over the south coast and Jeju Island. In particular, heavy rain of up to 250 millimeters is expected in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island, and more than 80 is expected on the south coast. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at 10 degrees, Gwangju 14 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 18 in Chuncheon, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju. From next week, daytime temperatures will drop to around 10 degrees and morning temperatures will drop to around 3 degrees, making it cold. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.